Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all can hear us well. My name is Harriet Kendall. I'm the Associate Director for Administration in Residence Life, and I'll let Laura introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Laura Smith. I'm the Assignments and Occupancy Coordinator with Residence Life here at William & Mary.
So today we are going to walk through, it's a lot more of the contract language, but then we're also going to talk about housing selection itself. And then at the end, you should be able to submit your questions for Q&A, and we'll go from there. And so we're excited to start talking about room selection. And so we'll start the session with that.
So why live on campus? We have found from our surveys that students find living on campus to be convenient. They find more of a sense of community with the William & Mary family. It's more inclusive housing costs. So heating, air conditioning, Wi-Fi, water, sewer, all of that's included. Students have also found that they have an improved satisfaction with the college, and it also gives them the opportunity with being on campus more to develop those strong connections with faculty.
So what's happening in room selection 2021? The biggest question I think that everyone has is why the change in the timeline. And a big part of that is that by moving room selection up, there is minimal overlap with classes and stressors. A lot of the times in the past, when students got their time slots, it overlapped with their projects, their labs, tests, quizzes, and then students were worried that they would miss their time slot to get the room that they wanted. And so by moving up the timeline, we're hoping that that kind of takes that away and relieves some of that pressure. And we've also made it a little bit more flexible in some ways too. This year, if you decided not to submit a housing application in January and decided you wanted housing later on in the semester, you could submit your application, and then we would essentially assign you a room selection time slot to go in on one of the following dates. So in February, there's the 16th, in March there's the 9th and the 30th, and then April there's the 20th, and then June there's the 1st. The other thing about this is that, let's say you go through the room selection process in January and you and your roommate decide, where we selected really isn't where we want to live. And so you could have the opportunity to go back in on any of those dates and reassign yourself to a new room. And that's something that we've never done in the past. In the past, you've had to submit a room change and then you had to wait and see if there were any rooms and waiting for us to see if there were rooms and spaces. The other nice thing about this too is that, let's say you were wanting a single and you went through the selection in January and there were no singles available at that time, but then you look in March or even in June and there's a single at that time, you'd be able to reassign yourself essentially to that single for the academic year. And so that is something that we're kind of excited about, to give students a little bit more flexibility and be able to go in and kind of change things around if they wanted to. After that June 1st date, then it would be that traditional room selection, room change request, where you would go in and request a new room for the academic year. So this just gives you a little bit more flexibility. And so that's the biggest change. None of our building designations are changing next year. So we're kind of excited about that. Everything that is set from this year will be the same for next year, including our specialty housing. And so that will all remain the same. And you'll see that also in the housing application when you do go through that process.
So who's eligible? So students have to be currently enrolled, a full-time graduate or undergraduate student for this spring 2021 semester, or be readmitted for the fall 2021 semester to be able to apply for housing. If somebody is not yet readmitted or re-enrolled and they have questions about that, they need to contact the Dean of Students office about that process. Also, if you are a approved study away student for the spring, you're also eligible to participate in the room selection process. The university did implement a 2-year residency requirement beginning with the class of 2023. So students who are in their freshman or sophomore years for the next academic year are required to live on campus. So for our current freshmen, that means that you do need to go through the room selection process for 2021, 2022.
So if you're social class 2024, you are required to live on next year. If you're social class of 23 or 22 or 21, you are not required to live on campus. And so keep that in mind too. So completing and submitting your online housing contract, if you were to submit it by the 15th, so the housing application will open on January 4th. What that means is that on January 4th, you would be able to go in, sign your housing contract, read it thoroughly, sign it, and then also preference some buildings that you might be interested in. If you didn't end up participating in room selection and we ended up assigning you in the summer for some reason, you're also then able to get into your roommate groups and do that piece at that time. But if you're submitting it by the 15th, what that means that if you're a student who has an approved adaptive housing or an SAS medical accommodation on file, you'll be assigned to the priority room selection days for those time slots, guaranteeing your accommodations for next year. If you waited until after the 15th, it doesn't guarantee your accommodations, because then at that point it's based on like what is available at the time that you go for room selection on a different date. All other students that submit their applications by the 15th, you'll receive that first priority of regular time slots based on your social class. And so if you're in before the 15th, you have a higher chance at a better time slot. If you submitted your application after that time, after that 15th date, you would be assigned to the end of the day on your social class. And so keep that in mind too. Students who submit also by that date get assigned to, so we kind of have it broken up where there's the priority housing selection days, there are special interest housing selection days, there's fraternity sorority selection days, and then there's traditional room selection week. And so what that means is that there's seniors, juniors, and then sophomores get to select. And so those are the days that we refer to as traditional room selection week. And so if you have your application in by that date, you're guaranteeing one of those first slots during those days. Students who submit also by that date, you just have a better chance of getting potentially a room that you're more wanting. As we said, that if you submit after that day, we'll end up assigning you to the end of the social class on the next available room selection day. And so if you get it in between the 15th and your social class day, the day prior, we'll go ahead and assign you to the end of the day of your social class. If not, then we would assign you to that first room selection day in February, and then so on after that.
So considerations for when you're submitting your housing contract. Once they're submitted, they are legally binding. Prior to any occupancy, the contract has to be signed and dated, electronically accepted, as evidence that you are accepting the terms and conditions and regulations stated in the contract. If you're not yet 18, we do have some of our current freshmen who are not yet 18. Their parent or legal guardian must co-sign the contract. And that's done through the proxy system on the housing application. It actually won't let you go any further until we get that co-sign. Failure to check in, pick up a key, or occupy an assigned space does not release a student from the contract. And for failure to participate in room selection, check in, pick up a key, or occupy assigned space does not release a student from the contract. In the past, we have students who have a contract but didn't select a space by the end of room selection. Residence life staff just assign them a space. This year, we're just going to assign them a time during the next room selection day.
So something to keep in mind is that if you are social class of 2024, you are required to live on. And so keep that in mind, that even if you didn't do a housing contract, you still get assigned housing in the summer. And so we really encourage you to go through the housing selection process now so that you have a better pick of what you want to live in versus what we would assign at a later date. So period of contract. So when you sign your housing contract, this is language that you would see or similar to it, is that the period of contract is for the 2021-2022 academic year, specifically fall and spring when classes are in session. unless terminated or suspended under other terms and conditions of the contract. And so when you enter the agreement, you're agreeing that this contract is for fall and spring semester. And so keep that in mind. As we get closer to opening in the fall, we'll post actual move-in dates and when you're able to occupy your room.
So cancellation of the contract prior to occupancy. University policy requires freshmen and sophomore by social class to live on campus unless individual exceptions are granted. Either that be through the contract release portion of the housing application or through student accessibility services for a medical release. Students who are not required to live on campus have through February 28th from contract acceptance to cancel their contract without penalty. After that date, anybody who has signed the contract will owe and be charged full room fees. This is an extension from what we've done in the past. We're hoping this gives our students more flexibility as we're going through our current situation. Any termination of the housing contract subject to the terms that you can see listed online under sections 5, 6, and 7. Once next year's is posted, you'll be able to see it there. They may qualify a student for a refund or adjustment to room fees owed. If Residence Life is unable to provide a fall semester room assignment by August 1st, the student may request cancellation without penalty. And also, please remember the cancellation policy does not apply to freshmen or sophomore by social class for housing assignments. And a request for contract release have to be done on the contract release page of the housing application.
So if you're a rising junior or senior for next year, and let's say you sign your housing contract in January and you go through the whole housing process, and for whatever reason you decide that I don't need housing or I want to live off campus, you would have until February 28th to cancel with no penalty. And so you have about from January 4th to the 28th, it's about 7 weeks to kind of make a decision, which in the past, it was you signed your contract, you were locked in after 24 hours, and then fees kicked in. And so we're hoping that this gives a lot more flexibility to students. So after that February 28th cancellation, like I said, up until the 28th. And so this is pertaining to rising juniors and seniors and graduate students. If a request cancellation came prior to the 28th, there would be no penalty. From March 1st to the 31st, if you requested cancellation, it's going to be $500. That would be billed to your student account. And then April 1st to the 30th would be $1,000, and then May 1st to the 31st would be $1,500. This is lower than what we've had in the past. This year we waived fees completely, and so that wasn't a part of this year. In previous years we've had fees attached, and so keep in mind that we're looking at this will stay in effect for next year. It could change, we just don't know. And so for now, this is where we sit. Contract submitted after May 31st. This is so you didn't go through the housing process at all through spring semester, then decided in the summer that you wanted to do housing. This breaks down the cancellation process at that time frame. And so if you signed a contract, let's say June 5th, you would have 10 business days after that date to cancel at $500. And then after that, 11 to 20 days after that first initial date, it's $1,000. And then after that, you would have to submit a exemption release request through the housing portal of why you're trying to get out of that housing contract.
Contract release exemptions. Students are able to submit for a contract release exemption via the housing portal in that year's housing application. A release may be granted only to students who can demonstrate in writing and with supporting documentation an unforeseen change in circumstance that cannot be resolved in campus housing. These requests are considered on a case-by-case basis, and a release is not guaranteed. If a contract release is approved, the student may receive a refund as outlined in the withdrawal schedule and refunds under the undergraduate course catalog once checkout is complete, and release request decisions are final.
So a contract release exemption, some of you have probably used it this year, even with remote learning. And so our exemption releases cover, at least this year, remote learning. It covers commuters, so commuting from your permanent address to campus. It also covers financial hardship and also marriage and dependent. And so if you did housing this semester and signed up in the spring and then got married in the summer, all you'd have to do to have your contract canceled is to submit that information to the housing portal, and then we would release you from your housing contract. As far as remote learning requests at this time, you'll see it as an option currently, but if you were to select it, it's going to still route you through the housing application in the spring, because there's not a final decision by the university of what remote learning would look like in the fall, but it will still be listed. We highly encourage you to go through the housing process. So in case remote learning is not an option in the way it has been this year, that you would have the accommodations that you would prefer versus us assigning you at a later date. And so those are things to keep in mind. So cancellation housing contract during the academic year by a student. So if you fail to occupy an assigned room, you'll still be obligated by the terms and conditions of the contract. And so keep that in mind. You can initiate cancellation of the contract if you're withdrawing from the university. The contract would be terminated. So if you withdraw before the semester even starts, then we would go ahead and remove your housing bill completely off of your student account. If you withdrew during the semester, it would be based on the withdrawal dates that you withdraw from the university, and that would be the potential refund that you would get back. Once you officially withdraw from the university, if you're living on campus already, you get a notification that you have 48 hours to vacate housing because you're no longer an active student. And so that's why that's there. If a student were to withdraw and then re-enroll during the same academic year, we do reserve the right to reinstate the housing contract. So if you withdrew in the fall, it gets reactivated for the spring if you decided to come back in the spring. A student who withdraws from the university prior to the end of fall semester, so if you got through all of fall semester and then decided to withdraw either before winter break or during break, we would not bill you for the spring room fees. The only reason that might stay on there is if you went home for break and your items were still in your room, and then we would ask you to come back right away when the halls reopened to move out, and then we would immediately remove that housing charge at that time. And so keep that in mind. We also get notifications from Enrollment Support Services that students are withdrawing, and so that's how we are able to communicate to you directly that we have that verification. If a student leaves the university at the end of the fall semester, after having completed those requirements for graduation, your contract is terminated at that point. So if you know that you want housing just for fall next year because you're going to graduate in December, you will not be held accountable for the spring semester. We would confirm that you're graduating, and then we would remove those room fees. And then if a student is authorized to leave campus to participate in a study abroad or domestic program, we would go ahead and cancel your contract. So if you are on campus for fall but have a study abroad or domestic program that spring, we would go ahead and remove your housing contract at that time for you. And so those are different things by a student that the housing contract would be canceled in those situations.
So cancellation of the contract by the university. If removal of a student from the halls occurs due to disciplinary or administrative withdrawal, there are no refunds. The university reserves the right to terminate a contract if a student fails to meet the academic requirements, in which case the student may receive a refund after the space is vacated. That same withdrawal schedule and refunds there with the undergraduate catalog. The university also reserves the right to terminate a contract if a student fails to maintain full-time registration for the period of contract. For room adjustments, there's no adjustments to the charge for room fees that we made. There'll be no adjustments if the student has an absence from the university during any time during the academic year, unless that's one of the situations that was previously outlined. The university can also terminate contract and students' occupancy rights in the events of fire, earthquake, flood, hurricane, or other significant weather events or natural disasters, acts of God, strikes, work stoppages, or other labor disturbances, riots, or civil commotions, litigation, war, or other acts of foreign nation, plague, epidemic, pandemic, powers of government or governmental agency or authority, state of emergency, or other cause like or unlike any cause mentioned above, whether natural or man-made, which is beyond the control or the authority of the university. In the event of such circumstances, all refunds of housing fees will be offered on the following schedule according to the academic calendar for undergraduate classes.
So this is language that you all saw this year in the addendum that we had to put in place because of COVID-19. And so this language has now permanently taken a place in our housing contract. And so when you sign your housing contract, you'll see the statement, but then you'll also see the refund schedule based on if the university were to close for an unexpected reason. You would see what those refund schedules would look like for your housing. And so those will be officially built into the housing contract next year versus an addendum. So moving away from the housing contract and talking more about room selection itself, we offer several different things in housing. And so one of them is flexible housing. It's an option where 2, 3, or 4 or 6 students can elect to share an apartment, room, suite, regardless of sex, gender, or gender expression. We have quite a few students that actually choose this option and really enjoy having that option. We kind of walk you through where you're able to occupy in different sizes of groups. When you go through the housing application, it will ask you all to get into a group that then also agree to terms and conditions, because flexible housing is obviously very different from our traditional housing. And so we have to make sure that everybody is accepting and agreeing to living together. And so in groups of 2, it's limited to Hardy, Ludwell, and One Tribe Place. And part of that is because these buildings that we're listing here all have private shared bathrooms versus a traditional hall where it's a community bathroom. And so flexible housing is only offered in those spaces. Groups of 3 students will be in Landrum, which is also limited, and then Ludwell. Groups of 4 students will be able to select Tribe Square, Graduate Complex, or any 4-person suite on campus. Housing for 6 students is in Nicholas and Landrum only. In Landrum, it's up on the top floor because that is where we have bigger suites on that floor. Students who are accepted into the CW House or a living learning community, including Africana House, Mosaic House, language houses, students with priority housing are also all eligible for flexible housing. So keep that in mind. We have had students in the past do flexible housing in those spaces. Our language houses and the Mosaic House are all located in buildings that have suites. And so it's really easy to do flexible housing there. Flexible housing groups, you do have to fill the space that you're selecting into. And so like, if there are 2 of you and you're trying to go into a suite, it wouldn't work because the other 2 on the other side of the suite also have to be in that flexible housing group to agree to live together. So if there's only 2 of you that are interested in flexible housing, then we encourage you to look at Hardy, Ludwell, or One Tribe Place for that situation to be doable for you. And so keep that in mind. And keep in mind too, there are limited numbers depending on your group size. If you're a group of 4, you have a lot more options because you have the apartments and then also all the suites to look at. And so keep that in mind as you start going through your housing process.
So for flexible housing eligibility, the group has to be mixed sex according to the student records and banner to be able to select through flexible housing. All individuals have to be 18 years or older. If you're not 18, the system actually won't even give you the option to say yes or no to flexible housing. For upperclassmen and graduate students, they all have to be eligible for campus housing to be able to apply, and they cannot try to mix undergraduate and graduate students in a flexible housing selection. which is the same as regular selection where we don't mix graduate and undergraduates. And then, so everybody has to be eligible to be part of the room selection process to be able to do flexible housing.
So when we talk about special interest housing, what we are referring to is our language houses. And the language houses include Arabic, Chinese, French, German, Hispanic, Italian, and Japanese in the Russian house. Those are all located in Landrum and Hardy Hall on different floors within the building. We also have Africana House in Landrum Hall, which is a great community to be a part of too. Mosaic House is located on Hardy's second floor. And then Colonial Williamsburg House, which is actually located in Colonial Williamsburg. If that's something that you're interested in, it's a really cool opportunity because you get to live in Colonial Williamsburg, but also be a representative for the college or for the university, and then also connect. You're basically a liaison between Colonial Williamsburg and William and Mary, and so it's a really cool opportunity if that's something you're interested in too. So all of these have a deadline. Friday, January 8th is the deadline for submitting a living learning community application to the advisor or program. A lot of these programs, you'll see it listed in the housing application, but the actual application process is through those separate living learning communities. And so if you're interested in Africana House, then you would want to go to special interest housing on our website and then click into the Africana House page to see their application and then their questions and their timeline, because on the 8th is the last day to submit your information, but then they also do interviews, and so keeping that in mind too. It's the same for the Mosaic House and the language houses and the CW House. And so if that's something that you're interested in, go to our special interest housing website, check those out. And then if it's something that you truly are interested in, you can get in contact with those different living learning communities and ask direct questions to those advisors in programs. And that will be helpful if you're looking to look at that. I will say language houses are a really great opportunity. In the past, they had in the past, they had people that lived in the houses. This past year, they did not do that, and they will not be able to do that again next year, but they will definitely still have language houses in those halls.
So for priority housing, that includes medical accommodations for housing and adaptive housing. This year for a returning student room selection, the deadline to seek adaptive housing approval for room selection is January 15th. And those with approval for priority housing selection will select their rooms January 20th through the 21st. For students who had AC medical approvals, those do carry forward through your entire time at William & Mary unless there's a change at the Student Accessibility Services Office. Please be aware though that if you have a general air conditioning accommodation, you will not be going through priority housing selection, as all of our upper class buildings already have air handlers that meet your needs. So the deadline to submit a new request with Student Accessibility Services is January 7th. This process for the 2021-2022 only pertains to students who are asking for accommodations for the first time. You need to get that in by January 7th so that we can properly put you through the room selection process. If you have any questions about your accommodation, be sure to contact Student Accessibility Services, as they are equipped to evaluate medical information where resident life staff are not. If you're not able to get that medical accommodation by submitting it by January 7th, we can look forward in the process to working to get you to where you need to be. But if you don't meet that initial deadline, you may not initially get into a spot that best meets your needs. Definitely though, if you have any questions about Student Accessibility Services or approved medical accommodations, please reach out to that office directly. They're very responsive and be glad to help.
And if you already have medical accommodation for this year, based on, let's say, a single or needed for a private bathroom, those all roll over for next year. It's more if you're wanting your accommodation to be changed for whatever reason, then you would need to kind of resubmit by that January 7th deadline to them. Or if you're seeking a completely new accommodation because you don't have one this year but would like one for next year, that January 7th date is really important. If you have a current accommodation, like I said, a single or a private bathroom need or a certain need that's already on file, um, except for the air conditioning, unless you needed a controlled air conditioning room, all of those will roll over. But you would need to submit that housing application by the 15th to guarantee that we've added you into the room selection day for priority housing so that you can go in and secure that. If you're a current sophomore and you're going to be a rising junior or senior, you'll have the opportunity to also secure your room through same room selection if you decided to stay in your same room. And so that's something to keep in mind also. And then we have adaptive housing. And so we really try hard to have accommodations for students with documented needs that are outside the kind of a medical request. That can be based on gender identity, religious need, or recovery from substance abuse. Each request is considered on a case-by-case basis. And sometimes we ask for documentation, but a lot of time we do not. An adaptive room accommodation is not automatically transferable from one academic year to the next, potentially, if a building designation were to change. And so if you currently have an adaptive housing accommodation, if you sign your housing application by the 15th, we'll automatically put you into the priority housing room selection day for adaptive housing. So you'd be able to go in and request your room, select your room on that day. Again, if you're a rising junior or senior, you're able to secure the room that you're currently in for next year. If that's something that you wanted to do because you felt that the room worked out well this year, then you'd be able to go ahead and do that. If you do not have a current adaptive housing need on file, you can begin to request that now by emailing residencelife@living@wm.edu. And then with that, they'll route you to me, actually, to talk about what kind of housing you're looking for and if we're able to accommodate that adaptive housing need. If for some reason you do not request it now, and then over the next several months or even into summer, you decide that you need adaptive housing for whatever reason, you can still reach out to us and we'll do our best to accommodate your request. It just going through the process now makes it a lot easier on you because there are a lot more options at this time versus contacting us in July for that request. And so we would really encourage you to go ahead and get that request in now if you don't have one on file at this time. And so just keep that in mind as we go forward for the next academic year. And so, like I said, if you submit your housing application by the 15th, you'd get to do your housing selection on the 21st.
So singles for sophomores. Single rooms are rarely available to sophomores to select during room selection. They generally go with the seniors since they go first. Sometimes there's some left over for the juniors during traditional selection. So singles sometimes do become available during the academic year, and sophomores can look at the room change dates throughout the semester to request or process into a single, or they can do the room change request form when that opens up in June if they would like to ask for a single at that time. We strongly suggest for sophomores, make all of your plans to have a roommate. Reach out to everybody in your hall. Could be your current roommate, could be your current suite mates. Use your acquaintance list, use all your social media that you have. If you're not having immediate luck finding a roommate, but we strongly suggest that you go ahead and find a roommate to go through room selection with. This will make your process go much, much smoother. We do recommend that students have plans A through Z because there's no guarantee that they will receive their top choices during the room selection process. So definitely make sure you have multiple scenarios set up. And if you're a sophomore and you're looking for that single, just remember it's unlikely to occur during traditional room selection.
So our timeline, as you know, changed in a big way this year. So January 4th is the most important date. You're able to go online and under room selection, you can click on returning, and online it will show you the entire calendar of dates. And so beginning January 4th is that first day that the housing application opens. Don't worry if you don't sign your application on the 4th, but you go in on the 10th and do a housing application and get it in, you're still going to be eligible for that first day of your social class to do room selection and be one of the times that are further up front. So keep that in mind, like you can sign a contract anytime between the 4th and the 15th to get that kind of priority time slot. And then also if you're for priority housing, or if you're looking at special interest housing, that's really when you want to have your housing application submitted. It's really between that 4th and the 15th of January. Like we said in the past, after that, if you submit an application after those times, we'll assign you to the next available room selection day. And so that might be during the traditional room selection if you're able to get your application in before your social class first day of room selection. If not, then you would bump out to February, and then into March, and then April, and then May, and then June would be the last possible time that you'd be able to select a room or change your room. And so keep that in mind. But online is the entire online selection calendar.
So step 1 is to complete and submit your online housing contract. Like we've talked about, it becomes available at 9 a.m. on January 4th of 2021. And it needs to be completed and submitted by 5 p.m. on January 15th. We've gone over students that have been approved for priority housing will be assigned room selection days, guaranteeing their accommodations for next year. They get that in by the 15th. Also, students who put theirs in by the 15th will get first chance at regular time slots during traditional room selection week on their social class day. If students are late submitting but get it in by the day before their traditional room selection social class day, they'll get a time slot at the end of that day for their social class. And anybody else after that will be assigned a time slot on the next available room selection date later in the semester. And those dates are listed there at the bottom.
I think another thing to keep in mind for room selection, so if you are in a roommate group, you're able to go in between 9 and 2 on those room selection days to select a room with your roommate. If you don't have a roommate, you are able to go in at after 2 o'clock on those days with your assigned time to fill a room. And the reason for that is that if you tried to go in sooner, you actually wouldn't be able to fill the room because the system is looking for you to be able to fill the room to select the room. And so keep that in mind as you're planning too, that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do it right away. It might be after 2 because the system after 2 o'clock will look and say, like, if you don't have a roommate, you can go into this double and select the space. And so keep that in mind too. So prepare for selection. And as Laura has mentioned too, like prepare, like come in with many scenarios as you can possibly think of in case your number 1 building is not available by the time you get to room selection. Take time considering your plans, including like who you're going to room with, and keep in mind like singles are limited. Look at all our different buildings and look at all the different options. Every building is very different. There's not one in the same building really when it comes to room selection. And so keep that in mind. We also encourage you to go online and look at our online room selection self-assignment guides, because that will kind of give you screenshots of like how to actually go through the room selection process when your time slot opens and how to select a building. I'm going to tell you now that when it gets to room selection day, there is not a list outside of the system that's going to show you what rooms are available at the time of your room selection, because it's happening live. And so you won't actually see what's available until you go in during your time slot. And that's why we tell you to prepare so you have different alternatives. as rooms start to go. And so keep that in mind too.
Especially groups of 4 who they're looking at doing an apartment or a suite. And if they go in and there's not a preferred building there, and the group has decided that if this group of buildings is not available, they need to be prepared to go ahead and split up into 2 separate groups of 2. So keep that as part of your plans A through Z. What would we do if we can't get into our group size into the space that we want? What are we going to do? Scenarios are definitely the way to go.
Especially if there's not a suite in a building that you really, really want. You could always break out into the group of 2 and assign that way, and then keep checking back later on in the semester to see if a suite opens up at a different time, and maybe go in and change your room at that time. And so keep that in the back of your mind too, that might be an option. And then, like I said, learn what to expect from the online room selection link on our website before the beginning of your time slot. It's really helpful when you go in and kind of look at those guides ahead of time, so that you can kind of see what it will look like in the system, especially if it's your first time going through room selection. Because obviously when you're a first year student, you're actually assigned to housing versus getting to select your own room. So it does feel very different. And so be sure to go in and take a look at what that would look like.
And remember that only group leaders can select spaces for the group. So if there's a group of 2, group of 3, group of 4, group of 6, you do have to have understanding that only the roommate group leader is going to be the person that goes in and physically makes the selection. So we do recommend that whoever has the earliest time slot in the group be the group leader. And that gives you the earliest time slot to be able to have the group select into a preferred space.
I know this is a big question this year too, is what if I'm applying to be an RA or want to live with one, being that the hiring process is looking different this year also. So students who are hired as an RA will be assigned to their new space by Residence Life. But if there are additional beds in the RA room or the suite or apartment that they're assigned to, they are able to select who their roommates will be, and they can discuss that with those people. If that's the case and they all wish to move in with the RA, what happens is that once that hiring is done, a new page essentially opens up in the housing portal for an RA roommate agreement. And so that the students agree, like, yes, I'm living with an RA, here's what that means. And then they get into a roommate group with the RA. And so once we see that, that's confirmation to us that you all want to live together, and then we'll administratively move you all into that room together. We advise that if students are unsure if they will be student staff members or will be living with a student staff member, that you should proceed through the room selection process at this time, as though you weren't going to be an RA or live with an RA, because if you are hired as an RA or decide to live with an RA, then we'll change it after that time. And so keep that in mind, because that way you kind of secure your preferred housing in case one of the scenarios plays out. If you're not hired or you decide not to live with an RA, then you've secured your preferred housing at that time. If a student is hired as an RA and leaves a vacancy in their old room, so a group of 4 of you went into a suite together and the 4th person leaves because they got hired as an RA, the group will have through June 1st to fill that space. And so you'll be able to kind of talk to other friends or recruit people to that room, and just keep that in mind on those room selection, room change dates throughout the semester. If it occurred after June 1st, then you can request a specific roommate through the room change request form process.
So just remember, by signing the housing contract, you're committing to pay for the campus housing for the full 2021-22 academic year. And that means you commit to housing before you know your specific room assignment. So please review the contract carefully, including the limited cancellation policies, as this is a legally binding document.
So if you have questions that you're not comfortable asking out into a public audience, and you have individual questions specifically on today or for your own housing selections for next year, then you can go ahead and email us at living@wm.edu.
So in the Q&A, there's a question, can sophomores live in their fraternity house? And what is the process, different date for contract? The contract date is the same. Sophomores can live in their fraternity house. The list of who's going to be living in fraternity and sorority housing is generated by the chapter president, and they coordinate that with our office. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us through living@wm.edu. You can also reach out to your chapter president. We'd be glad to answer any questions folks have about that process.
And you'll also see that fraternity and sorority housing, they have a selection day that starts in January, but it rolls into February also. But rising sophomores absolutely can live in a sorority or a fraternity house. Another question we had, how can we verify if we canceled for fall 2020 but reapplied for spring 2021? And we will be notified if housing approved available for spring 21. So this is more for currently, if you have resubmitted a housing application, you should be getting contact from our office in the next few weeks. If you don't hear before the end of next week, then it would be early January that you would get a notification from us with a housing assignment. We are working through those assignments right now as we head into break ourselves. We're looking at those daily and trying to get people assigned as quick as possible. For those of us that were in Cabell Hall at the beginning of this year, but were moved to another residence hall after a few days on campus. So right now, you would be able to do same room sign up, but Cabell will not be available for next year at this time. So you will not see that part of the room selection process. But you would be eligible for same room sign up in the building that you're currently in.
So for SAS medical accommodations, all of that is listed on the Student Accessibility Services website. If you go to the William & Mary website and search Student Accessibility Services, that'll be the first page that pops up.
Can you break into your group of 2 from a 4-person flexible group during the selection process if a space you want isn't available? Yes. And so if you're in a 4-person group, but for whatever reason a suite is not available or an apartment is not available, then you would be able to break down into the group of 2 and 2. Keep in mind that when you break into that group of 2 and 2, you would have to reassign new group leaders to each of those groups, and then you'd want to assign the group leader again, whoever has the best time slot to select the room. And so keep that in mind if that were to happen. That's part of the plan.
So for a pair of roommates that want to select into a 4-person suite, if the pair of roommates doesn't want to live in a hall bath situation and they want that suite, they will have an opportunity between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. on their room selection day to select into any available space. But they won't be able to do it at their time slot. They'll have to wait until that between 3 and 5 p.m. period where students can select into any available space.
Because again, that system is looking to see if you are filling the space from I think it's from 9 to 2 or 9 to 3. The system looks to see if you can fill the space. And then after that time, the afternoon is when you could go in and fill that out for a group of 2 into a suite.
There's a question of, to clarify, if I'm living in sorority housing and fill out the contract the sorority provides, do I fill out the school forms as well? The answer is yes. You cannot live in on-campus housing unless you have a William & Mary housing application and contract on file.
So this question says, when do roommate groups need to be finalized? They need to be finalized by your time slot or the group leader's time slot. So you can change your roommate group from the time you sign in January all the way up until your actual day of selection. Something to keep in mind is be open with your group. So if you remove someone from your housing group, they get an email from the system that will say group leader Laura removed Harriet from the group. And so they'll get notifications. So keep that in mind, like have open, honest conversations about that. And so keep that in mind, but you can change your roommate groups even in the selection time. Like we've said, like if you were to go in, see a suite of 4 isn't open, you can split that roommate group up at that time. So you can change it throughout the process.
right up until the selection is confirmed. So singles are hard to get, but what about triples? So as folks know, there was a large number of triples that were removed this year. So triples are very limited, and the majority of them are in Ludwell. For roommate groups that have only 3 in them, it's extra important to have that plans A through Z in case you get into the system and there are no 3-person triples left on campus. Be prepared to split into that smaller groups, be prepared to pull in a 4th person, or be prepared to discuss who's going to be going through room selection by themselves between that 3 and 5 p.m. period. Definitely be sure to keep open communication with those that you're considering living with.
So this question is, are there on-campus apartment options? Yes. So we have Ludwell apartments that house 2 to 3 students, depending on the apartment that you were to select. We have Tribe Square, which is 4 people apartments. Those are individual bedrooms and then shared main living space. And then we also have the Graduate Complex. In the Graduate Complex, we have not just graduate students living out there, we also have undergraduate students living in apartments. And again, those apartments are 4-bedroom or 3-bedroom, and then you share a common space and bathroom. And so those apartments all look slightly different. You can see all the different things, floor plans and things on our website under residence halls, or under living on campus and then residence halls. And then you can look at the different apartments there.
And there's also the Nicholas Apartments at the Randolph Complex, which fit 6. There's 3 bedrooms, 2 students apiece for roommate groups of 6.
How does single, double/double work online? It's said to be considered a triple, but is it likely for sophomore to get this?
So that would be like a single double suite. There are less than 10 of those on campus. It might be even less than 5. So I would say treat that like any other triple. That can be your top choices, but be sure you know who you're going to break out for roommate groups if that's not available when you go into select.
So another question is, when we choose our room in the site, will it show a blueprint of the rooms and we choose a specific room number? So when you're in the housing portal, it will show you the room numbers, the exact room that you would be assigning to. It does not show the blueprint, but all of our floor plans are currently on our website. So again, if you go to our housing website and then go to Living on Campus and then select residence halls, that is going to show you all the different floor plans for different buildings. But then once you're in the housing portal on your room selection day, you'll be able to see like room 101 Landrum is open, and then you'd be able to go in and select that room.
So somebody's asking that if they transfer or they're considering it and will not know if they're accepted until May, will they get their deposit back, get out of the housing agreement? Just want to reiterate, there's no deposits involved with room selection or with housing, but students who withdraw or transfer before they move in for the academic year can request to have their housing application canceled at no fee.
And we also, like, if you were to withdraw, we also get withdrawal reports, and we'll reach out and confirm, like, we see that you're withdrawing from the university, we're going to cancel your housing, and then we'll go ahead and remove your housing at that time.
Because only active students can have active housing contracts at any time.
Is it true being an RA means that you are able to choose housing like everyone else, or does Res Life do it for you? When you're hired to be an RA, you're hired for a specific building and room, I believe. And so we would actually assign you to your space if you were hired as an RA. You wouldn't get to go in and kind of select, you wouldn't select in the housing portal like where you wanted to be an RA. that is a separate process outside of the system.
So somebody asked a follow-up question for flexible housing. If a suite in a preferred space is not available and the group of 4 decides to break into 2 groups of 2, you said we have to assign new leaders. Would we be able to continue selecting right then, or do we have to continue selection later? So if you break out into groups of 2, the person who is going in at that moment to select for their group because their time slot has opened, they can go ahead and make a selection. For the other group of 2, they have to wait until their group leader's time slot has opened to go in and make their selection. Sorry. And the other part of that is I have medical accommodations and will be selecting before my social class day. Will I be able to select a room for my half of the group during the priority day? So folks going through priority housing selection for medical or adaptive housing, what rooms available to you will depend on what your actual accommodation is. If you have any questions about that, please email us directly. If you're approved to have a suite bathroom and you have a roommate group of 4, we're going to actually have it so that you can select into a suite for a roommate group of 4. If you have any questions at all about your priority housing, please email living@wm.edu, because we do understand that accommodations are very much on a person-by-person, case-by-case basis, and we want to work through the process that best suits your needs.
So we are at 4 o'clock. So we're actually at the end of our time. So we're going to quickly answer these questions. There are 4 questions that are posted right now, and those are the last 4 that we're going to answer really quickly before we all have to let you go. So the question is, what happens if you join a fraternity during spring semester and you're invited to live in the house sophomore year? If you're invited to join a fraternity in the spring and you want to live there next fall, what happens is that the chapter president and the house manager will let us know, and you have the option to get assigned to that house for that year. And there'll be more information coming on fraternity sorority room sign up at that time. But you're absolutely able to move into that house as a sophomore. If you're currently a freshman, and you get accepted in spring, you're not eligible to move into the house until next year.
So for sophomore roommates or any roommates, must there be a group leader who signs up, or do they both select and choose each other? So when you create a roommate group, it'll show in the roommate group who the group leader is, and the group leader will be the one making the selection. If the group decides that they need to change who the group leader is for whatever reason, including after they receive what their time slots are and they want that earliest person to be the group leader, the current group leader can go in and change the group leader to their friend who's in the roommate group. By being in that roommate group, the system is showing that you do want to and choose to live together.
The question is, what are the clusters in Hardy? Are they selected by clusters or individually? I would almost say don't use the word clusters. When you look at Hardy, you're looking at suites or doubles or singles. And so you would be selecting by the suite or a double or a single, depending on what you're looking at assigning to. So if you're a group of 2, you can assign to a double during the morning hours. If you're a group of 2 and you're wanting to select into a suite, you would have to wait until the afternoon when the system is looking at allowing to fill spaces at random. And then with the single, if you're an individual person looking at for a single, then you would go in and assign to the single. It's not by clusters. And so it's by the room space itself.
So it says, if you weren't on campus for fall 2020, how likely are you to get your selected room double without finding a possible roommate? I'm going to answer this in reference to our presentation today. If you, whether or not you are on campus for 2020, 2021, doesn't necessarily inform what your opportunities are for 2021, 2022, unless you're doing same room sign up, fraternity, sorority housing, special interest housing. what is available when your time slot opens during traditional housing is what's available and what is your current opportunity. And once again, if you're not able to select into a preferred space, then you should take those opportunities later on in the semester to arrange a room change, including if you have found a preferred roommate.
So we were able to answer all the questions that were submitted. If you have more questions, please email living@wm.edu with questions that you may have now and between rooms sign up. Keep in mind that the university will close for break, I believe December 23rd through January 4th. We reopen January 4th, the morning that the housing contract goes live. And we will be checking questions and emails like that right when we come back. And so if you send something after the 23rd, know that we're not ignoring you. It's just that the university is closed and we're not checking email because we're all on break. And that we'll get back to you as soon as possible when we return on January 4th. But if you have questions between now and that break, email Living and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And again, after break. So if you have questions, feel free to email us. We're more than happy to answer your questions about housing. And even after you sign your housing contract and you have your time slot day, if you have questions leading up to what that means on that day, email us and ask the question. We'll get back to you with that. So thank you for signing in with us and learning more about the housing process. I know it's a lot of information that we threw at you today. And we're also going to go ahead and post this presentation on our website in the next few days. And so like if you want to refer back to it, you absolutely can. And so just keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we hope you're all having a wonderful winter break and we'll see you in January.